For this cause a man will leave his father and mother, has to be first. Cleaving to his wife, you have to work at it. They two shall become one flesh. You have to share everything. And the man and his wife were both naked in an atmosphere of honesty and purity, and they were not ashamed. It's work. It has to be first. It's work. You share, and you have to be careful. Those are simple laws, but they're profound. That's how God designed marriage to work. I promise you, if you keep those laws, you will have a great marriage. I promise you, you will. In October of 2014, Karen accused me of pulling the covers. And I mean, we've been married forever, you know, and so all of a sudden I'm a cover puller, you know, and so I woke up one morning and she said, you pulled the covers off me last night. And I was freezing all night long, and I said, I did not. She said, yeah, you did too. And I was real defensive about it. I don't know why, you know, but she said you pulled the covers. So this went on for like a month or two. And then one night we just had hell. It was just terrible. All night long, she was pulling the covers off me. It was like she was trying to pay me back. And all night long, I woke up pulling the covers like this. And so I woke up the next morning and I stepped out of bed and I had no covers on me. I woke up the next morning, Karen was already out of bed. I had no covers on me. And I stepped out of bed and all the covers were on my side on the floor. And I thought, she planted those there. She's trying to frame me. That sister's trying to frame me. So later in the morning, she walks to the bedroom and she said, you see what she did last night? I said, I did not do that, Karen. So, I started thinking about it. So I pulled the covers. So I was caught pulling the covers. And I thought about it, and I just thought, you know, for so many years, I didn't pull the covers. Why am I pulling the covers now? And so here's my belief, and that is a lot of the things that we do wrong in marriage, we don't do them intentionally. Okay, they're unconscious. And Karen would say to me, you know, Jimmy, you pulled the covers last night. And I just thought to myself, Karen, I was unconscious. You can't confront a person over what they did when they were unconscious. I take no responsibility for what I did when I wasn't conscious. And so it didn't matter. So I said to Karen one time, I said to her, you know, I'm going to start sleeping in the other room. Which I thought maybe she would be happy about. But she said, no, you're not going to sleep in the other room. You're going to sleep with me, but you're going to stop pulling the covers. And so I believe that a lot of the stuff that happens bad in marriage is not intentional. It's just because we're on autopilot. And we'll talk about autopilot here in just a minute. So I stopped pulling the covers. I thought to myself, why didn't I pull the covers for so long, but now all of a sudden I'm pulling the covers off Karen? And I thought to myself, it's because I'm not thinking about it. When you first meet someone, you're very highly focused. I mean, every little thing you do, you're thinking about it. Everything you say, everything you do. And when you first get married, you know, when you're sleeping together, you're very aware of the person that you're sleeping with. And so you don't do stuff like that. Hopefully you don't do stuff like that. And so I stopped pulling the covers. You say, well, how'd you stop pulling the covers? Because once Karen made me aware of what I was doing, every time I woke up and rolled over, I pushed the covers. I stopped being a cover. There's nothing worse than a cover puller, by the way. There's like Osama bin Laden, you know, mass murderers and cover pullers. They're all the same kind of people. And so when Karen was accusing me of that, I think that's nothing worse than a cover puller. But I stopped because every time I wake up now and I roll over, I push the covers. They just stop. And so let me talk to you about the dynamic of putting our marriage on autopilot. Now, when you're flying, you're very, very, very highly focused until you hit autopilot. Now, I'm a pilot, and so I fly a single-engine plane called a Cirrus. Some of you may be aware of Cirrus. It's a very good plane. It's got really good avionics in it and stuff. So when I take off, I don't fly myself anymore, but I flew around the country for years when I was speaking. So when I took off, I would have my autopilot set, and I would get, a couple thousand feet above the ground. I'd hit autopilot. And that autopilot would fly me all the way where I was going, and I would get there in about 5 miles from landing. I would hit the autopilot off, and I would land the plane. And so when you're dating, you're very highly aware of each other, very highly aware. When you get married, though, you begin to take each other for granted. That's the typical thing we begin to do. We take each other for granted, and we hit autopilot. Now, the most crashes are pilot error. And one of the dangerous things about flying today is that planes are so sophisticated, many pilots have lost the skills of flying. When you have to fly by hand, when you're learning to fly, you have to fly everything by hand. You don't have autopilot. It makes you into a good pilot. But when you take off and hit autopilot, you really lose the skills, and this is what happens in marriage. Whenever you put your marriage on autopilot, you lose the skills of relating. There are people that have been married for 2 years that have better relationship skills than people who have been married for 40 years. You've been on autopilot so long, you forgot how to fly. And so this message, I want to talk to you about this issue of why do we do the things that we do in marriage that are wrong unconsciously, and I believe it's because we've taken each other for granted. Our marriage is on autopilot. It's a very dangerous thing. So why do we hit autopilot in the first place? It's because we think that because we've reached the right altitude. In other words, our relationship got where we wanted it to get, and now we can autopilot and coast in. Well, here's the problem with autopilot. Every airplane only has so much fuel. And once you run out of fuel, you're going to crash. Now, so does your marriage. I'll talk about that more in just a minute. The other reason we hit autopilot is we want to put our main focus on something else. You begin to have children. The trend in marriage is your marriage is good until the kids show up. And that's the trend in most marriages. They're good until the kids show up. And when the kids show up, the marriage begins to do like this, because we take our main focus off the marriage and we put it on our children. Okay. Another reason that we hit autopilot is because that's how we were trained to fly. Your parents were on autopilot. Their marriage wasn't that great. They were raising kids. They were working and doing other things, and their marriage wasn't great. So you learn that. You learn that kind of behavior. Here's 3 important truths about flying in marriage. The number 1 is no marriage can fly itself. It requires human effort. There's no such thing as marriage autopilot. It doesn't exist. Now, we do it. I was doing that, when I was doing the cover pulling and stuff like that. The other thing is marriage is a 2-pilot plane. The plane that I fly is a 1-pilot plane. I can fly it by myself. I don't need 2 pilots. All commercial flights are 2-pilot flights. Every good airplane has 2 pilots. Your marriage cannot fly with 1 pilot. Your marriage requires both of you working at it to work. And the other thing is this: flying the plane is the most important thing you can do if you value the other lives on board. And so your children, if your marriage crashes, your children are going to hurt. You've got other passengers on the plane. Imagine that you're flying a commercial flight and the plane takes off and they hit autopilot, the cockpit door opens and the pilots start kind of wandering through the cabin saying, "How are you folks doing?" And you see the cockpit door open and there's no pilots up there, and you're saying, "Well, guys, maybe you need to be up there." And they say, No, it's on autopilot. You're all fine. And they're having drinks and they're talking to all the passengers and stuff. And the longer they're back there, the more nervous you are, because you're depending on them flying the plane. Your children are depending on you. Your family is depending on you to fly the plane. So let me tell you how to fly high in marriage. These are 5 things real quickly. Number 1 is believe you could crash. Here's how to keep your marriage flying high. You have to believe that you could crash. Now, when you're learning to be a pilot, they talk about invincibility. The worst pilots are the pilots who think they're invincible. They think they can't crash. Every good pilot is a serious pilot. When you're flying with a good pilot, they don't joke around. They don't play practical jokes in the cockpit. And when you're talking to air traffic control, they never tell jokes. They're the most serious people on earth, because they realize a crash means damaged lives. So they take it very, very seriously. And so the best pilots are the pilots who understand they're not invincible. And if they don't do their job, they could crash. Number 2 is this: you learn the laws of aerodynamics and you respect them. I have no fear of flying because I understand the laws of aerodynamics. Air is a very heavy liquid. That's why you feel it when you do this. And so a plane is designed, when it gets into the air, it's designed to lift in the air. It's very, very stable up there if you're doing the right things, the laws of aerodynamics. And so here are the 4 laws of marriage, real quickly. When you understand laws, you lose your fear. When you understand the laws of physics and the laws of aerodynamics, you completely lose your fear. When you don't understand aerodynamics, you think the plane is just up in the air and it can just fall out. It can't fall out. That doesn't happen. And so here are the 4 laws of marriage. Now, when Karen and I almost divorced, I didn't understand any of this. I had no idea about marriage. And so marriage was a mystery to me, and I just wondered, if we were going to divorce or not. But in Genesis 2:24, God said this to Adam and Eve: "For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife. They two shall become one flesh, and the man and his wife are both naked and unashamed. So I read those when the Lord healed our marriage. I read that, didn't mean anything to me, but the Lord told me to keep reading it, keep meditating on it, and I saw the 4 laws of marriage. Let me say this, this is what God said to Adam and Eve when he created them and when he created marriage. You say, well, how do we know that God didn't mean that just for Adam and Eve? I'll tell you definitively, they didn't have mothers. Adam and Eve were both directly created by God. If you want to find Adam and Eve in heaven, they're the only 2 people without belly buttons. That's how you can locate them in heaven. So God came to Adam and Eve and says, for this cause a man will leave his father and mother, cleave unto his wife. They two shall become one flesh. The man and his wife are both naked and unashamed. Here are the 4 laws of marriage that give you the ability to understand how it works, take all the mystery and fear out of it. Number 1, marriage has to be first. For this cause a man will leave his father and mother. Before you get married, your mother and father are the most important relationship and blood kin in your life. And God doesn't say you have to abuse them or forsake them. You just have to reprioritize them. Before you get married, they're first. When you get married, marriage is first. Marriage only works if it's first. If anything else is first, except for Jesus, and Jesus doesn't divide marriages, Jesus causes marriages to get better. The first human relationship on earth is marriage, okay? It has to be before work. It has to be before children. It has to be before church. It has to be before friends in real terms. And if you put anything before your marriage won't work because it was designed by God to be first. Number 2, a man will cleave unto his wife. It's called the law of pursuit. Marriage is work. When it says a man will cleave unto his wife, the word cleave there, it's like the word to climb a mountain. It means to pursue with all of your energy. For this cause, a man will reprioritize his life and put his wife first, and he will pursue her with all of his energy. Marriage is work. So why do I say that? Because most people have a misconception that if they marry their soulmate, they don't have to work at it. Most people, so you guys are at a marriage conference, you get it. But most people believe if I marry my soulmate, I'm just going to wake up every morning, look at him, and go, hallelujah. But what happens, and the truth is, you wake up, look at him, and go, your breath stinks, you know. You have to work. There's no such thing as chemistry keeping a relationship going. You have to work at it. In any other area of life, we understand you have to work at it to succeed. But in marriage, we think, I can succeed without working at it. So we get married, we stop working at it, and the relationship doesn't work. And we think there's something wrong with our spouse. Okay? That's very typical. You have to work at marriage. It has to be first. You have to work at it. How long do you have to work at it? Till the day you die. Been married 48 years, the laws are the same, it doesn't matter. You can't go anywhere on earth where the laws of aerodynamics are different, and you get a pass. These are universal laws of marriage that God made for all people for all time. Number 3, it's called the law of possession. They two shall become one flesh. Marriage is about sharing. You have to share everything. Marriage is about sharing. I counseled a couple, very, very wealthy couple, didn't share anything. The only thing they did was live in the same house and share the same children. They didn't share anything else. And I looked at this man, very, very wealthy man. She wasn't the problem. He was the problem. I looked at him and I said, do you understand that marriage is about sharing? He absolutely didn't get it. He thought that he had his trophy wife. He thought that's all he needed. The more you share, the better your marriage will be. And sharing means you make your decisions together and no one dominates the other. So let me do my little poll here. I do this all over the world, hundreds of thousands of people. I want you, if you raise your hand, I want you to keep your hand up here for just a minute. How many of you were raised in a home where one of your parents was clearly dominant over the other parent? Raise your hand if you would. Keep your hands up if you would. Look around. Okay. Half, 60% of the hands. Put your hands down if you would. And so of those who just raised their hands, how many of you believe that dominance had a negative impact on your parents' marriage and upon the family? Raise your hands. All over the world, exactly the same thing happens everywhere. Put your hands down. Marriage was not created for dominant people. Marriage is brutal on selfish people. I dominated Karen for the first 3 years of our marriage. I have a very strong personality, and Karen is a lot more compliant. Now, it doesn't mean that sister doesn't have opinions. And if she's not now she dominates me right now, by the way. That sister's healed. And so, but the point is, you can't dominate in marriage. It's about sharing. When Karen and I make decisions, we talk, we pray, we don't bully each other. You won't pay a price for sharing your opinion honestly. And we never make a decision unless we both agree on that decision, without any pressure whatsoever. And if it's a really important decision, we make sure that we pray about it. And if you go around our house, there's not one decision in our house that doesn't say Jimmy and Karen on it. There's not one important decision that says Jimmy or Karen alone. So the more you share, the more you're together, the more you talk, the more you pray, the more you share decisions, the better your marriage will be. They two shall become one. Okay. Number 4, the law of purity. It says the man and his wife were both naked and unashamed. God created marriage to be a relationship of total intimacy. They weren't just physically naked, they were mentally, emotionally, and spiritually naked. They could be intimate without fear on every level until sin entered the Garden of Eden. And when sin entered the Garden of Eden, they began to hide themselves from each other. You can only be intimate in an atmosphere of purity, which means you're careful and you take responsibility for your behavior. I was not careful. I was verbally abusive for the first several years of our marriage. I was just not a good husband, and at times I would say things to Karen that were just terrible. And on the night that our marriage began to be healed, I went into the bedroom and I told Karen, I'm sorry for the things that I've done. And she said, your mouth, Jimmy, has devastated me. And it had. And I took responsibility. I said, Karen, I'm sorry. It's the first time, by the way, I'd ever said I was sorry about anything. I said, I'm sorry. And so the next morning I woke up and I changed. But by the power of the Holy Spirit, I changed. I changed the way I talked. I hung up my golf clubs. I came home. I started being with her. And it was a year later or something, we were talking, and she shared something with me that was, very intimate. And she shared something with me, and I said, Karen, how long has that been going on? And she said, oh, years. And I said, why are you just now telling me? She said, you weren't safe. She was covered with fig leaves. She couldn't trust me. But when our marriage began to be healed, the fig leaves started falling off, and I liked it a lot. And we had intimacy on a level that we had never had before. When you're around a person who's hurting you and they won't take responsibility for it, it's hard to open your heart to that. But when I'm careful what I say, I'm careful what I do, and when I make a mistake, I take responsibility for it, and I say these words, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? I was wrong, will you forgive me? Now, I had never said that early in our marriage. I became an expert at saying that. I'm sorry I was wrong, will you forgive me? And those things. So for this cause, a man will leave his father and mother, has to be first. Cleaving to his wife, you have to work at it. They two should become one flesh. You have to share everything. And the man and his wife were both naked in an atmosphere of honesty and purity, and they were not ashamed. It's work. It has to be first. It's work. You share, and you have to be careful. Those are simple laws, but they're profound. That's how God designed marriage to work. I promise you, if you keep those laws, you will have a great marriage. I promise you, you will.